Welcome to today's History of the Ohio Valley. Excuse me. It's brought to you as a public service by ESV Teleproductions. We will address issues and concerns of the residents in this area. Opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest. I'm your host, Bob Connors, and our featured guest this week is businessman Dolph Santorine and Ohio State Representative Andy Thompson. Dolph will be discussing related issues to fake news and other interesting things. Representative Thompson will be discussing gas and oil, Medicaid, and other stuff. And with that, welcome. We're going to have a little fun here with my friend Dolph Santorine. Welcome.
Bob, great to be here. Thank you.
I can tell you, as a businessman and an entrepreneur, I have a great deal of respect for you. But I think one of my favorite things about you, Dolph, I'm going to put right out here on the air, is you're a great family man.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate that about you.
Now, and I'm spoiled right now because I've got my granddaughters who's actually living with us. And
Wow.
I never thought I'd like that, and I wouldn't know what to do without it.
That's great. There's nothing like it. They know how to make you love them. I'm going to get to some questions here so we can enlighten our audience a little bit about what's going on in Dolph's mind. Last 8 years or so have been pretty difficult years for a lot of people in this country. And Donald Trump is doing a lot to change things, and he's actually getting some things done that are going to be helpful. But and a lot of people have suffered through the last 8 years. But what do you think is going on right now as far as how people are reacting to that?
I guess I'm very worried about what the media has been doing and how the media has been reacting. So much of the mainstream media and the incumbent media, for lack of a better term, has just become so left, and they're so vitriolic against Donald Trump. And so many of us who helped to get President Trump elected are very excited about what he's doing, especially now, that we've seen, some of the problems that have come home to roost, especially with escalating costs on Obamacare and the like. And the media is not really giving that justice. All they're doing is chasing this alleged Russian connection, and right now, I don't think there's anything there. It's an awful lot of smoke and an awful lot of distraction, where the real issue right now is Obamacare is collapsing. And we really need, our government to turn around and take care of that, because they really jumped in with Obamacare, they jumped in the healthcare business in a big way. And that's important to every single one of us.
Yeah, do you make a little bit, maybe make a couple of comments about why Obamacare is failing as far as expense and difficult to use and those kinds of things?
I think part of the problem, and part of what is making it more difficult for our legislators to get away from it, is the fact that they did an awful lot with Medicare. With Medicaid, and putting a lot of adding people to those roles. And the problem with that is they pay such a small rate to the doctors and the hospitals that it turns around and actually increases costs for those of us who have private insurance. And so, basically, if each one of those appointments costs $10, say, and you go in there and you're 100% covered on Medicaid, and Medicaid pays $6, it doesn't matter. The doctor still needs to end up getting $10. So he's going to take you, who work for a living, and increase your fee to $14 to make up for the money that he's losing on the other side. And it's a never-ending spiral.
So essentially, the Medicaid and welfare costs, that they go to the doctor, and it's basically costing the doctor money to see them, and they charge people who have insurance more money, so therefore they're causing this whole thing's causing the price of health care to go up.
And it goes up on the tax-paying Americans, the people who work for a living. It's untenable. And then a lot of these deductibles. Oh, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. We know that's not true. But the other thing that's not true is these deductibles that they've put in place to end up making these programs work ruin the average family. If you go in, if you've got gallstones, okay, and you're working for a living, and you go in to have those taken care of, and you've got a $7,000, a $9,000, a $10,000 deductible. I mean, that buries the budget for the average working family.
Oh, absolutely.
And you just can't afford it. So what do? You don't go. Or you push it off until it gets worse. And all of a sudden, you're working for a living, you're paying taxes, and somebody who doesn't work and is completely on welfare ends up with better coverage than you have.
So you're working, paying for everything, and another guy's getting the health care, and you're not getting it.
Absolutely.
That is true. What do you think concerns the general population? What do you think people are really thinking right now about this kind of stuff?
You know, there's so many different issues, and watching how the left ends up approaching the issues versus how the right approaches the issues. I mean, one of the things I'm worried about is, you know, they talk about resist, and if you look at the United States Senate, there are 52 Republicans and there are 48 Democrats. And the 48 Democrats always march in lockstep, all right? If they end up saying no, all 48 of them say no. I'm worried about those 52 Republicans. We sent them there to do a very specific thing, and that's to end up supporting a lot of the policies that we like that came from Donald Trump.
Right.
And what they're doing is, well, they are not working as a block. And because of that, they're not getting anything done. Hey, listen, we watched Obamacare get rammed down our throats when the Democrats had this control, okay? And right now, if you're a Republican and you are not voting for something new when it comes to health care, you're casting a vote for Obamacare.
That's true.
That simple. It is that simple. There should be 52 Republican votes all at once in the United States Senate. And I don't understand why that they're not dealing that way.
Let me ask you this question, Dolph, and maybe folks at home would be interested in this too. What do you think people who, like me and you, who voted for these Republicans because we want some change, how do you think we're going to feel about these people who are not doing what we asked them to do, like repeal Obamacare? That's pretty simple.
Well, yeah, and we've got that issue right now over in West Virginia, is when we end up, you know, obviously we have one Democrat, one Republican in the United States Senate. But when you end up looking at the Republican, you know, you'd want to start backing away. She needs to step up, and she signed up for this, and yes, guess what? It's not going to please everybody. But you know who it is going to please? It's going to please the people who put them in office. It's going to please the people who end up financing their campaigns. It's going to please the people who work and pay taxes in West Virginia. And that, I think, is a big deal. Listen, you know, trying to be moderate and trying to appease the left, they're going to forget. They will forget. And they will single you out like they'll single out anybody else. And they actually do a better job of being nasty than we do as Republicans and conservatives.
Yeah. So I think we can agree that people like Capito and Capito and the rest of them who are doing this, John Kasich from Ohio, they are going to cause, and they are causing, healthcare costs to go up for the working guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to ask you this one more question about this area. What do you think those working guys are going to say come election time? This guy just raised my cost of health care. I can't take my kid to the hospital because I can't afford it because of that guy gave more money to people who don't work. Who do you think they're going to say?
They're going to say, hell no. We're going to find somebody else. But I think our legislators also need to remember that the only thing that's in the middle of the road is possum. All right? You need to pick a side, and you need to work with that side. And when you try to end up being in the middle, you're nowhere.
You end up roadkill, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You end up with a yellow line right down your back. And we're not sure if it got painted there or it was there in the first place.
I think that's what we're going to have coming up is they're going to be roadkill. I don't think they understand that, Dolph. The ones I've talked to, they just give excuses. I really don't think they get it. But I want to ask
I really think we dodged a bullet in 2016. I think that we got lucky. I think if we were looking at another 4 to 8 years of, you know, a liberal Democrat, I think this nation, for starters, I mean, obviously, you know, the nation felt it was on the wrong course, which is why it elected Donald Trump. But unless we end up making bold changes, it's going to be more of the same, and it's more of the same mediocrity. Look at Europe. They're having a wonderful go at it right now.
This is true. You know, I just recently had a conversation, and one of the things that came up in the conversation is there's only one person in Washington, D.C. and holding elective office right now who's working for the American people. There's only one.
Donald Trump.
That's right. The president is the only one there who's representing the people. Our representatives on both sides of the aisle are not.
They need
That's
to,
scary.
They need to deliver legislation. They need to support the president's agenda, and they need to get something done. Because, to be blunt, I can't think of a lot they've gotten done with control of both houses for the last 2 election cycles.
Yeah.
It's like time to show us something.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And speaking of that, how do you think conservatives are positioned coming into the next election in 2018?
It's going to come down to, the midterms are going to come down to people's wallets. Do I have a job? Is there an upside? Are things moving ahead? And, let's face it, with the average person or their employer shelling out $8 to $10 per hour for health insurance, having a truly affordable insurance solution for healthcare is going to be absolutely essential, because that's going to hurt people in their paycheck or help them in their paycheck, and that needs to be addressed.
How much did you say Medicaid, or not Medicaid, but Obamacare adds to the paycheck for the wages of an hourly wage for someone working?
Obviously, you can end up picking those numbers apart at any point in time. But, for example, I have an acquaintance who's early 30s, 1 child. It's he and his wife. It's $1,000 a month.
$1,000
$1,000
a month.
A month, right? We know another couple, late 30s, 3 children, $1,600 a month. $1,600 a month. You work 160 hours in a month. That's $10 an hour, just for the insurance. Wow. And they have a deductible, all right? That, if they have to end up utilizing that health care, that deductible will quite literally wipe out their savings, wipe out their vacations, wipe out an awful lot of what they worked for. And you know what? That's not fair.
It's not. So you're basically saying if people, they have Obamacare, and if they use it, they bust. If they can't afford to use it anyway.
Right.
So who's happy with this bill?
Oh, those on welfare. People on welfare will absolutely love it.
Then it doesn't cost them anything, and if you didn't have Obamacare, here's the good, interesting part for those people who are on welfare. For those who are on welfare, if we did away with Obamacare, if it never existed,
they wouldn't see any difference.
They wouldn't notice any difference because they were covered anyway.
Yep.
As are the Medicaid people covered anyway. So I don't understand who's behind this.
This is the great fleecing of the middle class. And it was brought to us by the Democrats and Obama. And I cannot believe that people actually bought into this. It's absolutely appalling.
I would agree with that. There are at least 4 senators, McCain is one of them, who voted against this current bill, which is called skinny repeal for Obamacare, which translated means we're not going to really do anything with this bill, but 4 of them decided they're not voting for it, so they essentially killed the one thing that had a chance of moving over to the House. Any comment?
I didn't read the legislation, and those who know me know that I usually end up either reading it in full or at least skimming it before I end up running my mouth on it. And I guess I ended up looking at the skinny repeal as optics, because people will end up remembering, well, we got the repeal, but it was so minimal, at least from what I saw. And of course, it's subject to change, because what's going to happen is the Senate's going to get done with the bill. They're going to say it moves on or not, and then it would end up going to the House, where it's going to end up getting it changed and amended again. And yeah, it's time for the Republicans to start acting like a bloc. Do something.
What do you think the consequences are if they decide that they're going to pass this and it means nothing? It doesn't really do what they said it's going to do. What are the political consequences here?
I don't know. In some cases, I don't know if there are. A lot of these guys think that they can appeal to the independents or the people in the middle with this, and they can't.
No.
They really can't, because there is no middle.
There is no middle. I would agree with that. My theory on what they call the middle, they're looking for the bandwagoneers. Those are the people who jump on the winning team. So if they think that side's winning, they'll go that way. If they think this side's winning, they'll go that way. But they really don't care about the issues. That's why they're in the middle.
Right.
They're on the fence.
Or they have one or two issues, and whoever is not offending those issues is who they jump with at that point in time. But the fact is, what has Obama brought us? He's brought us college and university tuition that is out of control. He's brought us healthcare costs that are out of control and not sustainable. He's got he left behind in his wake restrictions on U.S. business and U.S. industry that were just horrible. And now we're starting to get some of those out of the way. And obviously, Trump has addressed a number of them via executive order. He's gotten us out of a number of treaties that were extremely negative to the U.S., and he got us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Lots of good things are happening, and industry is responding to that. People are going back to work, and that's exciting.
Yeah,
and I think people are going to end up remembering that. And I hope that, they can connect the dot and say, hey, my senator, my representative supported this, and therefore deserves to go back again and have another go at it in D.C. But at the same time, if they stood on the fence, then maybe it's time to make a change.
Yeah, I'm wondering if what will happen here when we look at for example, Wisconsin just had a deal that President Trump got involved with and brought it home, and it amounts to 12,000 new jobs making $57,000 a year. It's great for Wisconsin. It's a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
The president also has done a lot with trade deals that we see are benefits from. By himself. Now, this is his own thing, his activities that make it happen. He also has reduced the number of people running across our border by 70%. 70%, and he's rounding up illegal criminals and removing them from the country, which is saving lives. So he is doing things. But when you compare that to the Republican House and Senate, they've done nothing. So, or very little. Mm-hmm. So what is the people to think when the party they expect to support the president that they voted for, and many of them came in on his coattails, what did they think, in your opinion, people are going to think about this when they're not supporting the president who is representing our agenda, the agenda we voted for? It's very clear. Mm-hmm. What do you think they're thinking?
There's a piece that's checks and balances, and I think we all understand that. But right now, the Foxconn deal in Wisconsin is fabulous. It still has to clear the legislature in Wisconsin. But I'm 800 miles away, and I feel good about that, I guess. And I hope they get it. And 12 to 13,000 jobs is a big deal. Foxconn it's a high pressure environment. You're going to earn every penny of those $57,000 on average. But when you start thinking about that, especially in areas that had their economy routed because the Obama administration ended up putting in all kinds of restrictions on what they could do. Paper was a big industry up there, and they pretty much sent the whole paper industry to China.
Wow.
And so now they have an awful lot of highly skilled people with a positive outlook who will now have something to do, and that's wonderful. But Trump can't do this all on his own. There's 300 plus million of us, and it's not going to be easy. So we really need our legislators to get behind him as well.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Let me throw something else at you here that I'm aware of. There are a lot of people in this country upset with what's going on, as you have expressed here and as I have expressed here. And there's a feeling that the Republicans we voted for, and we voted for them because we were going in the wrong direction. Absolutely. And they're refusing to turn the wheel and go in the direction we need. And they put themselves in a situation where they think they're untouchable, that they can get away with this because the other alternative is really bad. Which they really believe this. So there's a movement going on right now that is just starting to raise its head above water. And that is that since none of them want to be responsible for it, they all must be held accountable by asking the leadership of the House, 5 people, and the leadership of the Senate, 5 people, to step down and resign. Demand that they resign and new leaders step up because the party has failed, and beat that drum all the way to 2018, and they can deal with it as they want. That is in the works. So I know I'm just throwing that at you, but
No, yeah.
you know, the idea is that to make them accountable for what they're doing, and if you hold the leadership accountable, you're holding all of them accountable, since none of them want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're all accountable, they'll all have to face somebody come election day.
The old days of wanting the responsibility but not the blame are long gone. Right now, you're going to get an equal dose of both. So if you're on the team that ends up passing good legislation, that will be remembered. If you're on the team that does nothing or stymies good legislation, like repealing Obamacare, that will be remembered.
That will be remembered.
That
What do you
will
think about calling for there have been a couple of radio talk show hosts also call for this, about removing the leadership, telling we want it changed, new people have to step up and hold them accountable. What do you think that will have any impact on us?
What's that old adage about insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result? You know, Mitch McConnell is well past his sell-by date.
Yeah. I think his sell-by date got rubbed off years ago. So anyway, that is something that's coming, and I personally think that that will have an effect on them if enough people get behind the idea that the leadership has to go. Just doesn't mean they have to be thrown out of office, but they need to step down from those leadership positions and let some fresh blood in there, someone who can get something done.
Yeah, at the end
Well,
of it,
if you own a football team and it's failing miserably, you don't get rid of the whole team. You get rid of the coach and the leadership.
absolutely. Because guess what? The players don't change that much when the coach does.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that can be the difference between a winning season and a losing season. The ultimate metric, by the time you're done, is did you get anything done?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's move on to something a little more fun.
Okay. I like fun.
Lamestream media,
Oh, my.
mainstream media, fake news, distortion after distortion, chasing Russian fantasies. What's your take on this?
How do you sell newspapers in a declining market? How do you end up getting viewers when your viewership, especially for your very expensive to produce nightly news,
Yeah.
is in the tank? And the question is, the answer is, they start pandering to smaller and smaller pieces of the audience. And I'm afraid that's, we've gotten to a point right now where you can't trust NBC, CBS, ABC, PBS, or almost any of the other main television networks, and you certainly can't end up trusting a lot of the newspapers. It used to be we had 2 newspapers in town. We had one conservative newspaper and one liberal newspaper, and because of that, those 2 kept each other in check. And what we got was a whole lot closer to factual reporting. But what's happened in most communities is one of the 2 newspapers has fallen off, or they've been acquired. They're now owned by one holding company, and we tend to end up getting what I think is, center right, or else we get completely loony left. You look at the Tennessean. You go to Nashville, Tennessee. They have one newspaper in that town. It's called the Tennessean. It is so far left, you would think it represents the entire state, and it doesn't. It represents the liberal elites who end up living there. And you go through market after market, city by city, and you find these newspapers that have no sense of reality.
I would agree with that. I was in the broadcast industry, and I can tell you what I see the same thing you see, is they are finding a niche. And their niche is going to be this liberal group here. It seems like a lot of the networks think that everybody's liberal, but they are looking for a niche. The next thing is, we'll end with this one, but what does Dolph see on the horizon with all of the craziness we see with Republican Senate and congressmen who don't want to do their job of what we sent them for? They're completely ignoring the agenda that we voted for. The president is being attacked by the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, and the mainstream media on a daily basis. What is your outlook on from here? Where do we go from here?
I think at some point they end up realizing we have the presidency, we have the Senate, and we have the House. All right? And if we don't do something, the legacy that they end up leaving will be horrible. I'm very hopeful that shortly they will end up understanding this and moving forward, and moving just forward decisively. Because, you know, the middle of the road stuff has got to go, and what we need to do to undo the damage that was caused by Obama over 8 years is bold, decisive action. We have the right guy at the helm. We just need to get the Senate and the House to end up recognizing this and get behind it.
Well, maybe if we force the leaders to step down, maybe some new people will show up, and it could happen.
I think they need to be reminded that come election time, you know, those of us who, you know, my support is not guaranteed. All right, your support isn't guaranteed, and I think most people's support isn't guaranteed, and they need to be reminded of that. And the checks won't be coming, and they need to keep that in mind.
I think that's true. Dolph Santorine, what a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Great seeing you as always.
Good
Thank
to
you.
see you. I hope we do this again. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next time. Dolph is a great guy. I like having him in, and we'll do this some more.
So we're all mic'd up. They
okay.
catch us from up here?
All right, what's that? Hold on a
Yes,
second.
this mic?
Yeah, your mic's already. It's overhead mic. You won't have to worry about that. That'll be. That way we don't have to worry about mics moving around and that kind of thing. All right, I'm ready. I'm ready when you are.
And I don't need to
What's
look
that?
I don't need to look into a camera. Just
Oh, okay.
talk to him.
Just tell me when to go. Hello, I'm Bob Connors, your host. Welcome. We have a wonderful guest this hour. It won't last an hour. ESV Teleproductions presents this as a public service, and we like to bring in people who can help you understand some of the things going on in our area. Today we're very lucky to have State Representative Andy Thompson here. In my opinion, Andy is probably the best representative we've had, and he's the guy I know does the right thing all the time. Andy, welcome.
It's very kind of you to say, Bob. Thank you.
You're right on it all the time. What we're going to do is just ask you a few questions, and we'll see what happens,
Roll.
just relax. And
Sure.
First one is about the gas and oil exploration in the region. What legislation have you done related to this area? And what do you see happening in the future for this area on gas and oil?
You know, I think the best thing that we've been able to do is to maintain a climate that is business friendly. So keeping taxes reasonably low, and the governor has really insisted on trying to raise taxes all the time and done different ways of dicing and slicing it and making promises. But I think fundamentally, for the health of the industry, certainly for the pocketbooks of the people who are royalty owners, it's much better if we keep that tax climate reasonable and allow as maximum amount of exploration possible and allow those dollars to work in the communities where they're generated. If you send it to Columbus, as you know, it's like a one-way ticket and it doesn't make its way back to the place where it was generated. I think the best way for us to ensure that it does the maximum amount of good here is to never send it to Columbus, to keep it right here.
So are you working on making that happen? Is that?
Yeah, there's been an attempt over the last several budget cycles to raise the severance tax. I've opposed that, and the House has backed me up on that. I think the Senate at one point was kind of wobbly, wanting to give the governor what he wanted on that, but we've been able to stay strong and keep it at a reasonable level. Secondly, I'm working on a piece of legislation right now, and it's House Bill 225 to deal with the issue of orphan wells.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a remnant problem for many, many years of this. Think about the time of Rockefeller. Historical wells that were drilled way back when, they're no longer attached to anybody. The company that may have owned those at one point are now defunct. And so they're a problem and a threat to groundwater. So this bill would ensure that we ramp up the process of plugging those wells and eliminate that threat to groundwater and improve the properties ultimately of the people who have those on their properties.
Yeah.
Through no fault of their own.
Oh, okay.
So,
I want to move on to another subject that's kind of hot in the news right now, and that is the price control on prescription drugs. Ohio drug price, it's
Ballot
issue 2. Do you have any comments on what that is, or can explain maybe to people what it is so they understand what we're talking about?
Apparently it was a company out in California and a wealthy individual who wanted to come up with legislation to ensure that we wouldn't pay any prices higher than what the Veterans Administration pays to get pharmaceuticals. Again, sounds good in concept, but probably the net effect of that would be to discourage innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. As you know, you can't get a drug approved for less than $1 billion, I think, these days. That's FDA reform is another issue we could talk about another time, but frankly, I think this initiative, again, sounds appealing, but it's like government does things the way differently than we do probably in the private market. We do want to ensure that we continue to have innovation in that area because it is so expensive to get drugs approved. Each year we hear about new wonder drugs that can help us with cancer or other maladies that are, have a difficult effect on human beings, and I think that we would discourage innovation by trying to fix prices. Whenever we fix prices, it never works, whether it's gasoline or anything else. It has a lot of ancillary downsides to it. So
Yeah. So now I understand that the guy who is pushing this thing is from California, and I know the California guy is concerned about Ohioans.
Yeah.
And I understand he spent about $19 million in California trying to get this thing fixed, get the fixed prices.
Right.
So I guess my question is he fixing the prices for himself?
I don't know. I know that I think is he associated with some kind of AIDS organization or something? I think I might have read about that. So, California has lots of great ideas. I wish they would just keep them in California. And they may break off into the ocean sometime soon, and we might want to wave goodbye. If they get their independence, that might be a good thing for the rest of us because their financial situation is terrible. The taxes are through the roof. Their budget deficit is significant, and I don't know how you screw up a state that great, but they've managed to do it.
Well, I don't know if you know this or not, Andy, but I lived out there for a number of years. I know the state very well. Mm-hmm. You know that they recently had their legislative body pass a bill out of committee to have single-payer health insurance for Californians.
I heard that. What's interesting about Obamacare, and I heard this come up the other day, is that it really benefits 2 or 3 states really significantly. I think it's like California, Illinois, and New York State. the most poorly run states in the nation get a subsidy from the rest of us to
Right.
prop up Obamacare because of the demands that they're having in their own states. So
Right.
that aspect of us pooling our resources to pay for somebody else's, fiscal misadventures is not something we should do.
Exactly, and by the way, they didn't do a lot of financial work behind this bill, but they did discover an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
$400 billion was the estimated cost of this. More than the state brings in, almost double.
Yeah.
So it's insane, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, let's go on to Medicaid spending, speaking of out of control.
Yes.
How do we rein it in? What steps is Ohio taking right now? And will you override the governor's veto on Medicaid freeze of 2018?
I hope we will override the governor's veto on that. It depends on my colleagues, and we're continuing to try to move them in the right direction and to get consensus here. I think it's that particular piece of legislation, that particular aspect of what we're doing, relies upon the governor to actually take action, which is kind of the net problem with that thing. In other words, we pass it in the House and Senate. It still counts upon the governor to go and make a waiver application, and the likelihood is that he wouldn't take that process too seriously. He has shown a willingness in the past to just ignore the laws that he has actually signed himself. So, we've got that problem. Overall, it would send a good message, I think, this freeze notion, not just here but nationwide. And we got into this Medicaid expansion through inappropriate means or somewhat illegal means. I don't know if you remember,
Yeah,
but
I
I was
remember.
one of 6 members. Yeah, I know you
I remember
but I
very
was one
well.
of 6 members who sued to stop this, and we went all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, which unfortunately ruled in favor of the administration on this one. But that idea of running around the legislature to do something is something that President Obama has practiced. Governor Kasich in some cases has practiced. It's really unfortunate, and kind of tells you about how that balance of power has shifted very unfortunately in government. So what we're doing is we have provisions to control the eligibility so that the state legislature gets to determine who gets on Medicaid. I really feel like Medicaid was designed for the elderly, poor, the disadvantaged, those
Right.
who have problems generally in earning a living, and now we've extended it to healthy young males with no dependents, almost as a way to get them to be on something, to be dependent, and therefore vote with the party of dependence, which I think is the other side.
I'm not so sure that the people in general understand what that Medicaid expansion was.
Yeah.
But for those who don't understand, all of the people who were poor, women with children without a job, people who have disabilities, people who really needed it were on Medicaid,
Yeah.
and that was whether or not we had Obamacare.
Yeah.
Whenever this switch was made to this Obamacare expansion, they put on there healthy, working-age adults with no disabilities and no children.
Right.
And I'm wondering if the governor even understands that every time you put somebody on Medicaid, the price of health care for everybody else goes up.
Right.
So the people who are paying for all this are not only paying for the people on Medicaid, they have to pay more to get their health care.
Yeah. It really drives the cost of private insurance through the roof because Medicaid itself.
It's not just insurance, Andy.
Yeah.
The cost of health care
Oh, the cost of healthcare generally. Oh, yeah.
goes up because of
No
this
doubt about
directly.
it. Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's because Medicaid, as it reimburses doctors for the services, doesn't come anywhere close to covering the cost of the service. So you got something you're losing money on, and you're going out there and signing more people up. It doesn't really make any sense
It doesn't.
whatsoever unless you have some kind of philosophy of growing government that's one that we certainly don't support and
Right.
can't understand. So it's a real problem. We're trying to do something to limit eligibility. I think the idea of drug testing for benefits is one that may have a possibility under this administration in
What
Washington.
about a work requirement? I
work
understand that.
requirement
I
is another
understand
part,
that
yes.
drives it down a lot.
Right, yes, and work requirement is something else that we've been trying to put in too. So we haven't gotten a lot of help and support from Governor Kasich. Again, his aspirations down the road are probably pretty clear. He wants to run again, I think, for president and persuade everybody that they made a bad choice last time. But really, in terms of governing in Ohio, in terms of making sure that we get a handle on our expenses, if we don't do something to slow down Medicaid, it's going to consume all the money intended for education, For
For
the
everything
prison
else,
system, yeah, all the discretionary stuff is going to go out the window because we'll be spending purely on Medicaid.
Yeah, well, we talked earlier with another interview about the cost of health care going up, and a good analogy is if you have two patients go to the doctor and one is on Medicaid and one is on self-insured or through their job insured, and it costs $10 for that visit, which we know it's more, but $10, the Medicaid, the government will pay $6 of that.
That's probably generous.
And
but,
then,
yeah,
and if that, maybe $5.
right.
And then the doctor has to still make a living and keep the doors open, so he has to charge the other guy who has insurance $15
Correct.
to cover the cost of the guy who's not paying, driving up the cost of health care completely. And they're generally running people who have insurance, working people who have insurance, they're running them out of insurance and health care because nobody can afford it.
Correct.
Well,
Nobody
I
can
don't
afford it.
understand the logic.
Yeah, it's not just that, but it's also the Medicaid people who really need the Medicaid can't get the services they need because all these people who don't need it are jumping in line ahead of them. I read a really good Wall Street Journal piece a week ago. It's called The Potemkin Village of Medicaid Coverage. And really what it says is we've got this idea that everybody, now I've got insurance, but they go and doctors don't want to take it. And then you've got other people who, again, truly can't utilize it because somebody else is in line ahead of them. So,
And we're putting more people on it.
every day.
And
That's an industry.
But that's what Medicaid expansion put more people on it, and so it's insane.
It was double the estimate. Ohio had an estimate, I think, of about 300,000 or something, 375. We're now way past 700,000.
700,000 people. It just is not a workable situation.
And the reimbursement, the cost covered by the federal government went from 100% down to 90% as we're speaking. So that's going to, again, raise the level of burden. And then when Congress decides that they can't afford it anymore, guess who they're going to put it back on?
Where does the federal government get that money to send to Ohio?
From us?
From us. From us.
Yes.
I love that when Kasich says the federal government's going to pay it. They get the money from us, ladies and gentlemen, and then send it back to
And when
us.
we think about it, it makes us sick. So there we go.
We're going to shift gears here and move over to opioids. The crisis is obvious here in eastern Ohio. It's just a really, really nasty problem. Do you have any idea of any concrete steps that we might be able to take to deal with it?
You know, some of the steps that we've taken is we've tried to deal with that issue of the pill mills, these entities that are just cranking out pills and writing prescriptions and oversupplying. That was one of the first things we attacked when I was elected back in 2010, came into office in 2011. We went after these pill mills down in Scioto County. So that was a way to try to limit the supply. The other thing that we have done is trying to have a better registry of who's prescribing what, and that is called the ORS system. And so we have an idea that a person can't go in and get like multiple prescriptions for something because we will have a record of what they got previously. We've tried to limit the amount of pills that can be dispensed at any one time so that you're not, know how you go and you have a tooth pulled and you get like 72 pills, even though you need about 14. That's the kind of stuff that we're trying to address as well, without harming people who have legitimate chronic pain. That's, you kind of have to strike a balance there. But so that one part is that supply, and Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor was talking about the fact that pills come in from Canada, pills come in from Mexico too. That border issue, that border wall, that would really, really help on this because yes, we're getting those pills from someplace else. Whatever we can do at the federal level to stop that would be good. At the local level, I think ultimately this problem is solved by local intervention. And that's by people raising awareness, understanding what we're dealing with, talking openly about people who are facing addiction and who's been lost, because we've lost 4,000 in Ohio over the last year. So that grassroots effort with the evangelical community and the health community, I think would be effective as well. We need treatment options. We have to have a place to send these folks. Many hospitals have just dropped out or opted out because they feel they can't make money on this. It's very, very important that we have the healthcare community, the evangelical community, everyone we can. We need to enlist everyone we can to be part of the solution. And so that's kind of what I think we're getting sort of the basis of that. Then once we get people healed, they have to go into a community that's going to support them and hold them accountable. And we have to find ways to put these folks back to work because the idle hands are the devil's workshop. one of the things that's been suggested is the explosion in opioid use has been concurrent with Medicaid expansion. I'm not sure if the two are linked, but they do seem to be concurrent.
Well, let me tell you what I found on that
Yeah.
subject, by the way. As the state was trying to reduce the number of pills they can get through legislation, through the doctor and whatever, up to 2013, in 2013, this is the way to do it, there were 83 overdose deaths in Ohio. Medicaid expansion was put into place January of 2014. By the end of 2014, there were 515 deaths by opioids. There's a connection.
Yeah.
And I'm just not sure that anybody's understanding as we try. I know you guys are trying to limit the number of they can get a hold of and make it harder to get. But what we see now, the evidence is that just took those people who got addicted because it was easy to get, jump over to illegal drugs.
Move over to heroin
So
and other things.
the heroin is
Methamphetamine.
going up. Those things are going up higher based on what happened there. So there is a connection. We handed a Medicaid get your prescription free card to 700,000
Right.
adult people of the age, the exact age that is
Target
involved,
audience.
the target audience for the drug problem. Now,
No, I know. I think and then that volume of pills that they get, I mean, you get whatever you do, and then you go on the street and you can sell them. And there does seem to be a more addictive element to some of these medications that they get, the hydrocodone and others. So there is a connection, more highly addictive, and as a result, if you can't afford those, then you look for alternatives, and it could be methamphetamine, or it could be straight heroin.
so we're basically, the taxpayers are basically paying for people to get free.
Well, and the medical
Addiction.
marijuana is coming now too, so
And that's another whole
government will be in the
story.
business of gambling, alcohol, and medical marijuana. But I think there's we have to take wise steps. We have to think about the effects that happen down the road, and we've got so many issues to talk about tonight.
I know.
Make sure we get to all of them.
Yeah,
But
we're
this
going to
is
go to the next
This
one
is a
here.
critical one.
We'll go to the next one here. And that's your legislative agenda. What bills are on your docket?
Well, I mentioned that orphan well bill, which is significant, and just in part, one other thing I'll mention is recently Governor Kasich took about $15 million out of the severance tax revenue and sent it over to pay for the legal fees for Grand Lake St. Mary's. That was never the intent of the severance tax, to go pay for legal fees for Grand Lake St. Mary's. But so those are the kind of things we want to make sure that we prescribe, that the severance tax goes to what it was intended for, which is regulatory oversight of this industry and dealing with this orphan well issue. So I'll leave that legislation at that. The other legislative agenda I have, which is a kind of a continuous project that you're much familiar with, is Common Core. House Bill 176 is my current legislation. It's really about restoring local control. We replace at the state level the Common Core standards with Massachusetts standards that predated Common Core. They were #1 in the nation, highly regarded, college and career ready, whatever you want to call them. They were very, very effective, and they led Massachusetts from middle of the pack to be #1 in the nation. Led Massachusetts